Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Door to Door. I'm Virginia Stanley, and I'm joined by my colleagues.
Lainey Mays, hello.
Essie. Hi, everyone.
And today we have a really special guest with us, author Eimear Ryan, author of the forthcoming book, Holding Her Breath, which is a beautiful, wonderful debut novel. Love that jacket. Coming out in May. I just love that jacket so much. And this is a terrific sort of a coming of age story of a woman who is coming into her own, learning about herself and her identity, and also the story of her grandfather and his sort of tragic past. So, Eimear, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Virginia. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
It's great. It's great to have you here. I will do a quick bio of you, Eimear, and then we can get into the story a bit. Your book has already received rave reviews from the Irish and the UK media. The Sunday Telegraph called it whip smart. The Irish Times called it entirely fresh. And the Irish Independent said a refreshing, accomplished debut. Glowing blurbs as well from a who's who of Irish authors. Your writing has appeared in Granta, Winter Papers, the Dublin Review, and the Stinging Fly. And you are co-founder of the literary journal Banshee and its publishing imprint Banshee Press. You are from County Tipperary and now you're living in Cork now. Is that right, Eimear?
Yeah, living in Cork City for about 8 years now. So yeah, I'm well settled.
Nice, beautiful. I've been to Cork. It's just absolutely beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So thank you so much. We're doing this 5 hours apart, and just we wanted to bring this novel and you to our show and to librarians, and to make sure that they know about this wonderful story, which is so unique, so different, and these richly drawn characters that just feel so obviously deeply flawed. I'll stop and have you tell readers what you want them to know about this book.
Sure. Well, the story focuses on Beth Crow, who's a former elite swimmer, and she's just starting her first year at university. She had a mental health crisis in the recent past, and that caused her to quit swimming suddenly. And at the beginning of the novel, she's kind of just coming back to the pool and trying to mend her relationship with the sport. And in university, she meets a lot of English students who are obsessed with her grandfather, who was this tragic, poetic figure in the Irish literary landscape. He's called Benjamin Crow. And Beth herself, she knows very little about Benjamin because he died before she was born, and her mother and her grandmother, who she lives with, don't talk about him a huge amount, which is kind of, I suppose, a trope in Irish literature and even in Irish life, that, you know, if there's a tragedy in the family, especially a generation or two back, people don't talk about it because it's too painful. But of course, not talking about it brings up a whole other set of problems. So as she's kind of trying to find herself in the wake of kind of losing this swimmer's identity, she decides to kind of dig more into her family history and find out more about the life and death of her grandfather. And she has an instinct, I think, that if she does that, if she goes on this kind of voyage of discovery, she'll heal herself maybe, and maybe heal her family as well. So that's kind of the journey that she's on in the book.
I feel like I just read the book again. Oh, it's so wonderful, and I there's so much to explore in this book. Naturally, the theme of sports, and you get through a bunch of the book until you know that something has happened to her, and then you do touch on the pressures of sports and mental health, and she seems to be somebody who just loved swimming. It feels as if when she gets into the water, she is one with the water. That's how I felt reading it. That's where she belonged. That's where she was weightless, and that's where she was almost I don't know, maybe the strongest, or something like that. I mean, she's a very strong person in many ways, and she has a a core. Like you talk about her core in the book, you know, she's physically strong too, but it's that sense of I don't know, it seemed like freedom when she got into the water, you know, that she's just, it is who she is. And then there's that relationship with the water and her affinity with it. And then there's this, the pressure that mounts with becoming so good at what she is. I don't know, you could talk about that a little bit, you know, before we get into like her whole family dynamic.
Yeah, it's such a paradox with sport, I think, because when you're a young kid, you just love the activity that it is. Like you say, Beth just loves being in the water. I think it is where she feels most herself and most at ease and most comfortable. And but it happens that as a kid, you're drawn towards things that you love. But very quickly, if you're good at it, you kind of get put on this track, you know, where this elite track where there's just more and more expectations, more and more pressure, more and more responsibility. Not only that, it kind of eats up all of your time outside of school. So maybe other interests or other hobbies that you might have tried to cultivate, you don't get a chance to do those. And all of a sudden, this thing that you loved and you were drawn to becomes like a full-time job, you know, and it takes on a different, as any of us know, if you turn your passion into a job, it kind of takes on a whole new tenor kind of. So yeah, I think that's what she's struggling with. She's kind of hit a wall at the age of about 18 or 19, where she loves the sport, she loves doing it, but it's all of the pressure, other people's expectations on her back, the kind of the inability to explore who she is outside of the sport. All of that is kind of starting to pile up on her, and she makes the decision to just suddenly stop.
Yeah, yeah. I thought, you know, especially on the heels of the Olympics and, you know, all of that and everything before that. I mean, there's just, you see this and you know, for folks who are not, you know, athletes or anything near what these elite athletes are, then to see that crumble, you know, to see people crumble because of that crazy pressure. And it's like what started out as an innocent affinity or a love for something then becomes something completely different. And I just thought, you know, reading the manuscript and then watching what just happened recently in the Olympics, it was, and I just thought it just brought it home. And I just like, sadly, it's, you know, something that is a recurring theme, you know. Anyway, but you're, as we were talking before, your editor, who was also at one point a swimmer, was talking about how you hit all the notes and getting everything right about her swimming, and you were really in her skin. And so could you talk a little bit about your introduction to swimming and how that informed the writing?
I'm so glad that it kind of hit all those notes for Molly, because I'm not an accomplished swimmer at all. I'm a very poor swimmer, actually. I only learned to swim in my mid-20s. There's a character in the book, Sadie. She's Beth's roommate at college, and she says early on, "Oh, I never learned to swim, you know, because I'm from a landlocked county." And that was always my excuse growing up, because I'm from the Midlands in Ireland, and I never learned to swim as a kid. But when I was in my early to mid 20s, and I was studying creative writing in Trinity, which is where Beth and Sadie are also studying, and every student had free access to the swimming pool on campus. And I noticed that there was adult swimming lessons, so I signed up for those. I said, finally, it's time to kind of get this out of the way, learn how to swim, learn to stop being afraid of the water. And just for about, I think it was 12 weeks, I was just very much immersed in the whole environment of the pool, and I just started to love it. You know, the sounds, the sensations, the aesthetics of the pool. I just started to become obsessed with it, and I started writing about it and writing a lot about this new sensation of being in the water and being comfortable in the water. And I was just writing so much about it that it became inevitable then that Beth would herself be a swimmer. And I suppose as well, I play a lot of, I've always played sports growing up, but team sports. So I was really attracted to the idea of the individual sportswoman and how lonely a place that is actually. And, you know, one of the things I love about being on a team, you know, not only do you have friends around you and colleagues, but it's never all on you, you know, even if you mess up in the big game, there's someone else has also messed up at some point, you know, the blame isn't solely on you. But the idea of, you know, being an individual sports person and just having all of that pressure on you, particularly for Beth, because her dad is so invested in her success, and he's a well-meaning character, but I think you can still be well-meaning and still kind of put undue pressure on someone you love like that. So yeah, I was just eager to kind of explore sports, but from an angle that was unfamiliar to me, I suppose, just to kind of keep it interesting for myself as a writer.
Right, right. Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah, the characters, even, you know, Beth is wonderful, but even the side characters are so fun to stay with and to learn from. I was thinking about them even long after. And I even the grandfather who's not there, you know, he's not there, but he's such a big part of this. And I loved like the poems. I just would like to settle into them and just have them wash over me. Forgive the pun, but wash over me, and all the water puns today. But yeah, and just I love that the grandmother describes him saying like he had a lifetime's worth of sorrows lodged in his throat, and when she gets to hear his voice for the first time, the grandfather just like roared through those pages, even though you never speak to him directly, and it was beautiful. And so I just wanted to ask, like, what was the motivation when writing this? Like, did you have the thought of a poet in mind first, or did you have the athlete? Like, how did those converge?
It was the kind of the poetry side that came first, the kind of the literary mystery side, I suppose. I don't know, I'd been thinking a lot about the death of great artists, you know, and all of the ramifications and all of the kind of ripples that come from their deaths. Because this is 7 or 8 years ago now, but Seamus Heaney had just died. Philip Seymour Hoffman, one of my favorite actors, had just died, and I was kind of there was a weird mixture of like mourning and celebrating them at the same time, in a way that was like really powerful. And I was thinking how strange it would be to be, you know, close to a figure like that who is so widely beloved and who everyone kind of feels an attachment to or a sense of ownership of. And I kind of started just reading kind of in that direction, and you know, reading about like Plath and Hughes and other figures like that, and these figures who are so iconic, and their early deaths kind of almost just seem to like cement their mythic status, and all of these stories kind of spring up about them, and you know, some of them are true, some of them aren't. And I was really drawn to that idea of, what if you had one of these great artists in your family and they were very close to you in one respect, because I think one of the things that Beth is always thinking about in the book as well is how closely related she is to her grandfather, and you know, her mental struggles, are they a kind of a direct inheritance from him? But also he feels very far removed from her because she never knew him, and everyone in her family is kind of reluctant to talk about him. So there's that sense of her feeling extremely close to him, but also having so much to learn about him and to find out about him.
Yeah, it's interesting because when she gets to school, university, I mean, everybody's they can't believe that she's related. She's that Crow. You're related to Benjamin Crow, and which poem of his is your favorite? And she's like, oh. You know, like it is interesting, you know, that she's. But what's also interesting is that she gets closer and closer. She delves more deeply as the book goes on into, you know, what he represents. But he is quite the mythic figure to those around her. It's interesting. Yeah.
It's like Sadie says, she asked about talking about him, and she says, do you sit around and talk about your dead ancestors? Like, it's not, that's not weird that we don't talk about it.
Right, exactly. She said that Skiff was the only one of her poems that really spoke to her because of the description of the small pointed boat, like you were saying, the knife for cutting through water. And then that phrase pops into her head when she's swimming like a mantra. Yeah. That's great. I also love that, well, Essie, you go. I don't want to take up all the time. You go, Essie.
Well, I just speaking about the familial connection between them and just that, like, passing down that pain or that trauma, kind of the last line of the first chapter where they see that picture and she says he's looking beyond the camera, he's looking out to the sea. And I just thought that was really beautiful because I think it expresses the same kind of longing that Beth felt to understand who she was, and at the same time that connection through water. And I just kind of wanted to know if that was something that, like, the way that this mystery played out, if that was something that you planned or if it was something that came through your writing over time.
Yeah, no, the literary mystery was kind of, I suppose, my guiding light throughout the writing process, because there were so many gaps that I had to flesh out. But I always knew Ben and Lydia's story and how Julie fit into that narrative as well. And I always knew the journey that Beth would go on when she's trying to kind of find out more about her grandfather. And actually in earlier drafts, there was a lot more scenes that kind of flash back to the 80s that had like Ben and Lydia and Julie in them. And they got taken out at some point because I kind of realized it was Beth's story rather than the story of the older generation. But I am still just so fond of those characters, and they feel very real to me, I think, because I wrote all those scenes with them, and they're still very much kind of alive in my mind, you know. But yeah, no, that's kind of where the story started, was with Ben and Lydia rather than with Beth.
I love Lydia. She's a
Yeah.
badass. She's you know, she's so protective, you know, of the family, but she's a badass. She's just out there, you know, and she's put up with a lot. She's great.
Yeah, I love Lydia too. And she's always the smartest person in the room, and and she knows it too, which I love better, you know.
Yeah.
She's
Yeah.
aware of how powerful she is, I think.
Yeah, very. One thing I loved and I could connect to is that Beth really likes true crime. She watches all of the, maybe sometimes like kind of silly true crime stuff, but I love it. Do you want to talk a little bit about our obsession with that?
Yeah, that's kind of a self-insert, to be honest. I'm a huge true crime fan as well, and at a certain point I realized I was kind of becoming a parody of myself, because, you know, I would watch anything, no matter how ridiculous the title or the theme. And I suppose it's a way of a very strange way of dealing with anxiety, but I think that a lot of people share, particularly a lot of women share. And it's certainly a way that Beth has kind of channeled, I suppose, the darker side of her mind and her consciousness, but also the anxious side. There is something about watching these shows where the killer is caught and justice is served, that kind of helps her. I think she acknowledges that bad things happen, but also, you know, there is resolution. And I think that's what she wants in her own life and in her own family history, is resolution and understanding, I think.
That's interesting. I love what what you drop in there, like, you know, she's watching reruns of I Survived a Killer Spree, or Serial Killer Death Match. She gets Anne Rule books for Christmas. It's great. It's great. It just fleshes her out. She's terrific. I also found, I don't want to ruin, you know, we can only talk about the book so much, because as we always say, the joy is in the reading, and so we don't want to take that away. But I just found a parallel between Lydia and Ben and Beth and Justin. Do you know what I'm saying? I thought it was interesting.
Yeah,
Past becomes the present. Sort of.
Absolutely. It's two campus romances, I suppose,
Yeah.
and two teacher-student romances.
Yep.
And yeah, I think there is a lot of mirroring, definitely, between the two stories. the story of Ben and Lydia's generation, and then of Beth's as well. And it was a tricky balance, actually, and it's something that myself and my editor worked out over time. Is like, at what point are those echoes and those resonances really effective, and at what point are they a little too much, you know? So there was a lot of kind of pulling back at some junctures where there was a lot of kind of chiming between the two generations, but I do think that history repeats itself again and again, and I kind of like those moments where you kind of can see the similarities between them.
Right, but also there was some differences, you know, like it didn't dawn on me right away. Do you know what I mean? It was like, oh, right, wait a minute, he's so it came later, but it felt like a natural thing. I don't want to say too much more about the book because I want people to just enjoy the read in its natural flow. Eimear, did you want to read a paragraph or two from the book to just sort of wet people's whistles?
Sure. I might just read 2 paragraphs from the start of chapter 2. The year Beth was born, a rock star named Fritz Phoenix shot himself. Fritz had the sort of ambiguous beauty that made melancholy teens of all genders fall in love with him. Before he picked up the gun, Fritz signed off his suicide note with a Benjamin Crow couplet. Lydia, mildly spooked by the resulting bump in royalties, set up a bank account in her new granddaughter's name. Over the years, the money had funded her swimming career, coaching, physiotherapy, equipment, travel to meets in Europe, and for the past couple of years, regular psychotherapy. Beth is in the car with her mother when Fritz's nasal growl comes out of the speakers. Alice switches off the radio with a flick of the driver's side volume controls. I'm not a big fan of that one, she says.
It's good. It's great. Eimear, this has been just wonderful talking to you, and just getting a feel for the characters and the story flow, and this really complicated characters, past and present, and they all bring, so I don't know, that not true, but just that they're almost like people you know. Love the relationship between Eimear and Sadie, her roommate at college. All of them are just so, they're there for a reason, and they move the story forward, but in a way that it doesn't feel, nothing feels forced. It's just a story that you can't kind of stop flipping the pages because you want to know what happens next. And I do agree with you, Lainey. I think that the poetic writings are just so gorgeous. Benjamin Crow's writings, they're beautiful. So there's so much to this book. And we love that you've taken the time 5 hours away in Ireland to talk to us today. Thank you. Is there anything else that anybody wants to ask, or Eimear, that you want to say before we sign off?
I think if this were live, a lot of librarians would want to know what you're currently reading.
Oh, wow. I'm currently reading Interview with the Vampire, actually, because when the great Anne Rice passed away recently, I kind of realized to my horror I'd never actually read her work, even though I love the movie and I've watched it numerous times since I was a kid. So I said I'd get that book and read it, and I'm loving it so far. It's just a perfect comfort read, I think.
Any true crime that you're watching?
I started the Times Square Killer the other night on Netflix, which is really, really intriguing. So
I'm writing down. Got it.
So now we know what you're reading and we know what you're writing. What are you listening to?
I was listening to an episode of Generation Why just before I came on here, which is a true crime podcast. So, and I'm also listening to a really good narrative fiction show called Rabbits. I don't know if any of you guys have come across it, but it's kind of a contemporary cyber thriller, and it's really, really good.
That's a podcast?
Podcast, yeah, it's called Rabbits.
Okay.
Cool.
Making notes. That's great. Thank you. And what are you working on next?
I'm actually I'm now working on a memoir about my own life in sport, a kind of a feminist memoir on what it was like growing up in rural Ireland and playing camogie, which is a Gaelic game essentially, and just kind of my experience of that. And it's been really interesting actually going from writing about sport in a fictional sense to now writing about my own experiences in it. So that's what I'm working on at the moment, and that should hopefully be out next year with Sandy Cove here in Ireland.
Nice. That's terrific. Well, that'll be enlightening since we didn't even know how to pronounce camogie.
I'm very impressed. All of your pronunciations have been on point. So,
well, it's
For
but-
anyone listening, can you tell them what that sport kind of is? Like what it's like?
so camogie is the women's version of hurling, which is Ireland's national sport. And hurling is often described as a mix between hockey, rugby, and lacrosse. So it's a stick and ball game essentially. Yeah, it's great. I highly recommend you seek it out if you can. I think it's on ESPN sometimes. So
interesting. That's well, and we'll look for the film as well, which will be out, as you say, in time for St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah, the grass ceiling I think is streaming on the Culture Ireland YouTube channel on St. Patrick's weekend.
The grass ceiling, great title. Yeah, and it just looks so interesting, and I can't wait to see it. All right, well, now if we have everything that we want, we'll edit this down to not much editing, because everything you've said is just really, just fleshes out this story more and more. So thank you so much for coming on today to talk to us and to librarians.
Thanks so much, guys. It was lovely to chat to you all.
So Holding Her Breath by Eimear Ryan goes on sale May 17th, 2022 here in the United States. And we are so excited to have you with us today. Thank you again, Eimear, and best of luck. We'll hopefully talk to you again real soon.
Thanks so much, Virginia. Thanks, guys.